Hello, welcome to the Financial Times headquarters in London. I'm Philip Alexander, the senior editor of The Banker magazine, speaking ahead of this year's annual meetings of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the largest development finance institution focused on Central and Eastern Europe. It's perhaps appropriate that this year's annual meetings are at the bank's headquarters here in London, because the focus in Central and Eastern Europe is actually on Western Europe at the moment, and specifically on the Eurozone financial crisis. That's because from Poland on the Baltic to Croatia on the Adriatic and Romania on the Black Sea, the majority of banks in the countries that have joined the European Union or are applying to join the European Union are owned by Western European banks, in particular from Austria, Italy and Greece. All of those banks are facing new capital and liquidity requirements imposed by the EU, and some of them are also facing severe problems with funding and asset quality in their home markets. It's in this context that the EBRD has come together with banks and regulators from across Central and Eastern Europe to revitalize what's known as the Vienna Initiative. This was originally crafted in 2009 in response to the first wave of the financial crisis, and it was intended to coordinate the banks and the regulators and the development finance institutions to make sure that they continue to pursue a pan-European approach rather than focusing on narrow national interests that might have caused a systemic crisis in Central and Eastern Europe as bank liquidity dried up. Now, in 2009, the Vienna Initiative was widely credited with succeeding in shielding the region from the worst effects of the crisis. Banks retained their presence across the region, and where necessary they recapitalized their foreign subsidiaries. This time around the picture is less positive. Some of the worst hit banks are being forced to sell their subsidiaries in the region, but there aren't many available buyers out there. And research by the EBRD itself suggests that credit is beginning to dry up in the region. Now, the banks say that there isn't much demand for credit because the economic outlook is so uncertain, businesses are not planning to expand. But one of the problems seems to be the price of that credit is still too high, and that's because the banks haven't yet brought down their operating costs enough, and in some cases they may also still have a lot of non-performing loans on their balance sheet that they need to write off in order to clean up the balance sheet and start lending actively again. Perhaps the one bright spot in the meantime is that further east, in particular in Turkey and Russia, the banking sectors are still really doing quite well. Their economies are still growing quickly, the banks are less dependent on events in the Eurozone, and their balance sheets are healthier. And in fact, we're beginning to see signs that Russian and Turkish banks are picking up some of the slack in the areas where banks from Western Europe are pulling out. So Turkish banks are beginning to expand in the Balkans, and they're participating in syndicates for some of the crucial project finance loans in the region for projects like renewable energy. And meanwhile, Russia's Sberbank last year bought the Central and Eastern Europe network of Austria's troubled Volksbank. And interestingly, for the first time, Sberbank is actually one of the sponsors, alongside Austria's Raiffeisen and Italy's UniCredit, of the business forum that takes place at the same time as the EBRD annual meetings. There'll certainly be plenty to discuss there, and perhaps it's a good thing for the EBRD as an institution that next year's annual meetings are going to take place in Turkey's emerging financial centre in Istanbul. We look forward to it.